Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition, and today we're continuing our reading of Flow by Mihaly. I call him Mr. C because I can't read his last name. I'm not even going to attempt. So Mr. C is the author, and this book was inspired by an animated film with the same name. I don't think they're associated with each other. But I was very inspired by the animation. Anyways, so we will go ahead and start. Now, there are certain areas where it's highlighted. That means there's a footnote in the back, and we will be reading that as well. Okay. Okay. And today we're reading chapter 3, and this will be part 1. Okay, chapter 3, enjoyment and the quality of life. There are two main strategies we can adopt to improve the quality of life. The first is to try making external conditions match our goals. The second is to change how we experience external conditions to make them fit our goals better. For instance, feeling secure is an important component of happiness. The sense of security can be improved by buying a gun, installing strong locks on the front door, moving to a safer neighborhood, exerting political pressure on City Hall or more police protection, for more police protection, or helping the community to become more conscious of the importance of civil order. All these different responses are aimed at bringing conditions in the environment more in line with our goals. The other method by which we can feel more secure involves modifying what we mean by security. If one does not expect perfect safety, recognizes that risks are inevitable, and succeeds in enjoying a less than ideally predictable world, the threat of insecurity will not have as great a chance of marring happiness. Neither of these strategies is effective when used alone. Changing external conditions might seem to work at first, but if a person is not in control of his consciousness, the old fears or desires will soon return, reviving previous anxieties. One cannot create a complete sense of inner security even by buying one's own Caribbean island and surrounding it with armed bodyguards and attack dogs. Sounds like what the mafia does. The myth of King Midas well illustrates the point that controlling external conditions does not necessarily improve existence. Like most people, King Midas supposed that if he were to become immensely rich, his happiness would be assured. So he made a pact with the gods, who, after much haggling, granted his wish that everything he touched would turn into gold. King Midas thought he had made an absolutely first-rate deal. Nothing was to prevent him now from becoming the richest and therefore the happiest man in the world. But we know how the story ends. Midas soon came to regret his bargain because the food in his mouth and the wine on his palate turned to gold before he could swallow them. And so he died surrounded by golden plates and golden cups. The old fable continues to echo down the centuries. The waiting rooms of psychiatrists are filled with rich and successful patients who, in their 40s and 50s, suddenly wake up to the fact that a plush suburban home, expensive cars, and even an Ivy League education are not enough to bring peace of mind. Yet people keep hoping that changing the external conditions of their lives will provide a solution. If only they could earn more money, be in better physical shape, or have a more understanding partner, they would really have it made. Even though we recognize that material success may not bring happiness, we engage in an endless struggle to reach external goals, expecting that they will improve life. Wealth, status, and power have become in our culture all too powerful symbols of happiness. When we see people who are rich, famous, or good looking, we tend to assume that their lives are rewarding, even though all the evidence might point to their being miserable. And we assume that if only we could acquire some of those same symbols, we would be much happier. And let's see the footnote on that. Okay. For research on the relationship between happiness and wealth, see Diener, Horwitz, and Emmons, 1985, Bradburn, 1969, and Campbell, Converse, and Rogers, 1976. If we do actually succeed in becoming richer or more powerful, we believe, at least for a time, that life as a whole has improved. But symbols can be deceptive. They have a tendency to distract from the reality they're supposed to represent. And the reality is that the quality of life does not depend directly on what others think of us or on what we own. The bottom line is, rather, how we feel about ourselves and about what happens to us. To improve life, one must improve the quality of experience. This is not to say that money, physical fitness, or fame are irrelevant to happiness. They can be genuine blessings, but only if they help to make us feel better. Otherwise, they are at best neutral, at worst, obstacles to a rewarding life. Research on happiness and life satisfaction suggests that in general, there is a mild correlation between wealth and well being. People in economically more affluent countries, including the United States, tend to rate themselves as being on the whole more happy than people in less affluent countries. Ed Diener, a researcher from the University of Illinois, found that very wealthy persons report being happy on the average 77% of the time, while persons of average wealth say they are happy only 62% of the time. This difference, while statistically significant, is not very large, especially considering that the very wealthy group was selected from a list of the 400 richest Americans. It is also interesting to note that not one respondent in Diener's study believed that money by itself guaranteed happiness. The majority agreed with the statement, money can increase or decrease happiness depending on how it is used. In an earlier study, Norman Bradburn found that the highest income group reported being happy about 25% more often than the lowest. Again, the difference was present, but it was not very large. In a comprehensive survey titled The Quality of American Life, published a decade ago, the authors report that a person's financial situation is one of the least important factors affecting overall satisfaction with life. Given these observations, instead of worrying about how to make $1 million or how to win friends and influence people, it seems more beneficial to find out how everyday life can be made more harmonious and more satisfying, and thus achieved by a direct route what cannot be reached through the pursuit of symbolic goals. Pleasure and enjoyment. And there's a footnote on that. Pleasure and enjoyment. Aristotle's entire Nicomachean Ethics deals with this issue, especially Book 3, Chapter 11, and Book 7. See also Mr. C and Mr. C, 1988, page 24 and 25. When considering the kind of experience that makes life better, most people first think about most people first think that happiness consists in experiencing pleasure, good food, good sex, all the comforts that money can buy. We imagine the satisfaction of traveling to exotic places or being surrounded by interesting company and expensive gadgets. If we cannot afford those goals that slick commercials and colorful ads keep reminding us to pursue, then we're happy to settle for a quiet evening in front of the television set with a glass of liquor close by. Pleasure is a feeling of contentment, that one achieves whenever information in consciousness says that expectations set by biological programs or by social conditioning have been met. The taste of food when we are hungry is pleasant because it reduces a physiological imbalance. Resting in the evening while passively absorbing information from the media with alcohol or drugs to dull the mind, overexcited by the demands of work, is pleasantly relaxing. Traveling to Acapulco is pleasant because the stimulating novelty restores our palate, jaded by the repetitive routines of everyday life. And because we know that this is how the beautiful people also spend their time. Pleasure is an important component of the quality of life, but by itself, it does not bring happiness. Sleep, rest, food, and sex provide restorative homeostatic experiences that return consciousness to order after the needs of the body intrude and cause psychic entropy to occur. Oh, let me read that again. Sleep, rest, food, and sex provide restorative homeostatic experiences that return consciousness to order after the needs of the body. Oh, okay, I see. It provides restorative homeostatic experiences that return consciousness to order after the needs of the body intrude and cause psychic entropy to occur. Oh, that's a weird sentence. But they do not produce psychological growth. They do not add complexity to the self. Pleasure helps to maintain order, but by itself cannot create new order in consciousness. When people ponder further about what makes their lives rewarding, they tend to move beyond pleasant memories and begin to remember other events, other experiences that overlap with pleasurable ones, but fall into a category that deserves a separate name, enjoyment. Oh, excuse me. Let me drink my tea here for a minute. Went down the wrong tube for a minute there. Sorry about that. Um, Enjoyable events occur when a person has not only met some prior expectation or satisfied a need or a desire, but also gone beyond what he or she has been programmed to do and achieved something unexpected, perhaps something even unimagined before. Enjoyment is characterized by this forward movement, by a sense of novelty, of accomplishment. Playing a close game of tennis that stretches one's ability is enjoyable, as is reading a book that reveals things in a new light, as is having a conversation that leads us to express ideas we didn't know we had. Closing a contested business deal or any piece of work well done is enjoyable. None of these experiences may be particularly pleasurable at the time they are taking place, but afterward we think back on them and say, that was really fun, and wish they would happen again. After an enjoyable event, we know that we have changed, that our self has grown. In some respects, we have become more complex as a result of it. Experiences that give pleasure can also give enjoyment, but the two sensations are quite different. For instance, everybody takes pleasure in eating. To enjoy food, however, is more difficult. A gourmet enjoys eating, as does anyone who pays enough attention to a meal so as to discriminate the various sensations provided by it. As this example suggests, we can experience pleasure without any investment of psychic energy, whereas enjoyment happens only as a result of unusual investments of attention. A person can feel pleasure without any effort. If the appropriate centers in his brain are electrically stimulated, or as a result of the chemical stimulation of drugs. But it is impossible to enjoy a tennis game, a book, or a conversation unless attention is fully concentrated on the activity. It is for this reason that pleasure is so evanescent, that the self does not grow as a consequence of pleasurable experiences. Complexity requires investing psychic energy in goals that are new, that are relatively challenging. It is easy to see this process in children. During the first few years of life, every child is a little learning machine, trying out new movements, new words daily. The rapt concentration on the child's face as she learns each new skill is a good indication of what enjoyment is about. And each instance of enjoyable learning adds to the complexity of the child's developing self. And there's a footnote on that. Children's pleasure in activity. Early German psychologists posited the existence of functionlust, or the pleasure derived from using one's body in such activities as running, hitting, swinging, and so on. Greuze, 1901, Buhler, 1930. Later, Jean Piaget, 1952, declared that one of the sensory motor stages of an infant's physical development was characterized by the pleasure of being the cause. In the US, Murphy, Murphy, 1947, posited the existence of sensory and activity drives to account for the feeling of pleasure that sight, sound, or muscle sense occasionally gives. These insights were incorporated into a theory of optimal stimulation or optimal arousal, mainly through the work of Hebb, 1955, and Berlin, 1960, who assumed pleasure was the consequence of an optimal balance between the incoming stimulation and the nervous system's ability to assimilate it. The extension of these basically neurological explanations for why one finds pleasure in action was provided by White, 1959, Ducharme, 1968, and Deci and Ryan, 1985, who looked at the same phenomenon, but from the point of view of the self or conscious organism. Their explanations hinge on the fact that action provides pleasure because it gives the person a feeling of competence, efficacy, or autonomy. Hmm. Unfortunately, this natural connection between growth and enjoyment tends to disappear with time. Perhaps because learning becomes an external imposition when schooling starts, the excitement of mastering new skills gradually wears out. It becomes all too easy to settle down within the narrow boundaries of the self developed in adolescence. But if one gets to be too complacent, feeling that psychic energy invested in new directions is wasted, unless there is a good chance of reaping extrinsic rewards for it, one may end up no longer enjoying life, and pleasure becomes the only source of positive experience. Okay. And there's a footnote on that. Learning in adulthood. The importance of learning in later life has received much needed attention lately. For some of the basic ideas in this field, see Mortimer Adler's early statement, Adler 1958, 56, Tough 1978, and Gross 1982. Hmm. Yeah, this doesn't really say about learning adulthood, but anyways, we read that footnote. It'll probably be coming up next. Okay. On the other hand, many individuals continue to go to great lengths to preserve enjoyment in whatever they do. I used to know an old man in one of the decrepit suburbs of Naples who made a precarious living out of a ramshackle antique store his family had owned for generations. One morning, a prosperous looking American lady walked into the store and, after looking around for a while, asked the price of a pair of Baroque wooden putti, those chubby little chirrups so dear to Neapolitan craftsmen of a few centuries ago, and to their contemporary imitators. Signor Orsini, the owner, quoted an exorbitant price. The woman took out her folder of traveler's checks, ready to pay for the dubious artifacts. I held my breath, glad for the unexpected windfall about to reach my friend. But I didn't know Signor Orsini well enough. He turned purple and, with barely contained agitation, escorted the customer out of the store. No, no, signora. I'm sorry, but I cannot sell you those angels. To the flabbergasted woman, he kept repeating, I cannot make business with you. You understand? After the tourist finally left, he calmed down and explained, if I were starving, I would have taken her money. But since I am not, why should I make a deal that isn't any fun? I enjoy the clash of wits involved in bargaining when two persons try to outdo each other with ruses and with eloquence. She didn't even flinch. She didn't know any better. She didn't pay me the respect of assuming that I was going to try to take advantage of her. Oh my goodness. I'd probably be in the same boat as that woman. I just don't like bargaining. Some people like to haggle, but I don't. If I had sold those pieces to that woman at that ridiculous price, I would have felt cheated. Few people in southern Italy or elsewhere have this strange attitude toward business transactions. And then I suspect that they don't enjoy their work as much as Signor Orsini did either. Without enjoyment, life can be endured, and it can even be pleasant, but it can be so only precariously, depending on luck and the cooperation of the external environment. To gain personal control over the quality of experience, however, one needs to learn how to build enjoyment into what happens day in, day out. The rest of this chapter provides an overview of what makes experience enjoyable. Oops. This description is based on long interviews, questionnaires, and other data collected over a dozen years from several thousand respondents. Initially, we interviewed only people who spent a great amount of time and effort in activities that were difficult, yet provided no obvious rewards, such as money or prestige. Rock climbers, composers of music, chess players, amateur athletes. Our later studies included interviews with ordinary people, leading ordinary existences. We asked them to describe how it felt when their lives were at their fullest, when what they did was most enjoyable. These people included urban Americans, surgeons, professors, clerical and assembly line workers, young mothers, retired people, and teenagers. They also included respondents from Korea, Japan, Thailand, Australia, various European cultures, and a Navajo reservation. On the basis of these interviews, we can now describe what makes an experience enjoyable and thus provide examples that all of us can use to enhance the quality of life. The elements of enjoyment. The first surprise we encountered in our study was how similarly very different activities were described when they were going especially well. Apparently, the way a long-distance swimmer felt when crossing the English Channel was almost identical to the way a chess player felt during a tournament or a climber progressing up a difficult rock face. All these feelings were shared in important respects by subjects ranging from musicians composing a new quartet to teenagers from the ghetto involved in a championship basketball game. The second surprise was that regardless of culture, stage, or modernization, social class, age, or gender, the respondents described enjoyment in very much the same way. What they did to experience enjoyment varied enormously. The elderly Koreans liked to meditate. The teenage Japanese liked to swarm around in motorcycle gangs. But they described how it felt when they enjoyed themselves in almost identical terms. Moreover, the reasons the activity was enjoyed shared many more similarities than differences. In sum, optimal experience and the psychological conditions that make it possible seem to be the same the world over. As our studies have suggested, the phenomenology of enjoyment has 8 major components. When people reflect on how it feels when their experience is most positive, they mention at least one and often all of the following. First, the experience usually occurs when we confront tasks we have a chance of completing. Second, we must be able to concentrate on what we are doing. Third and fourth, the concentration is usually possible because the task undertaken has clear goals and provides immediate feedback. Fifth, one acts with a deep but effortless involvement that removes from awareness the worries and frustrations of everyday life. Sixth, enjoyable experiences allow people to exercise a sense of control over their actions. Seventh, concern for the self disappears. Yet paradoxically, the sense of self emerges stronger after the flow of experience is over. Finally, the sense of the duration of time is altered. Hours pass by in minutes, and minutes can stretch out to seem like hours. The combination of all these elements causes a sense of deep enjoyment that is so rewarding. People feel that expending a great deal of energy is worthwhile simply to be able to feel it. We shall take a closer look at each of these elements so we may better understand what makes enjoyable activity so gratifying. With this knowledge, it is possible to achieve control of consciousness and turn even the most humdrum moments of everyday lives into events that help the self grow. A challenging activity that requires skills. Sometimes a person reports having an experience of extreme joy, a feeling of ecstasy for no apparent good reason. A bar of haunting music may trigger it, or a wonderful view, or even less, just a spontaneous sense of well-being. But by far, the overwhelming proportion of optimal experiences are reported to occur within the sequence of activities that are goal-directed and bounded by rules. Activities that require the investment of psychic energy, and that could not be done without the appropriate skills. Why this should be so will become clear as we go along. At this point, it is sufficient to note that this seems to be universally the case. Sorry. And let's read the footnote on that. Okay, ecstasy. Extensive case studies of ecstatic religious experiences were collected by Margarita Lasky, 1962, Abraham Maslow, 1971, who coined the term peak experience to describe such events, played a very important role in helping give legitimacy to the consideration of such phenomena by psychologists. It is fair to say, however, that Lasky and Maslow looked at ecstasy as a fortuitous epiphany that happened more or less by itself, rather than a natural process which could be controlled and cultivated. For a comparison between Maslow's concept of peak experience and flow, see Privet, 1983. Ecstatic experiences are apparently more common than one might think. As of March 1989, over 30% of a national representative sample of 1,000 US respondents answered affirmatively to the item. You felt as though you were very close to a powerful spiritual force that seemed to lift you out of yourself. A full 12% claimed that they had experienced this feeling often or on several occasions. General Social Survey, 1989. It is important to clarify at the outset that an activity need not be active in the physical sense, and the skill necessary to engage in it need not be a physical skill. For instance, one of the most frequently mentioned enjoyable activities the world over is reading. Reading. That's what we're doing now. Reading is an activity because it requires the concentration of attention and has a goal, and to do it, one must know the rules of written language. The skills involved in reading include not only literacy, but also the ability to translate words into images, to empathize with fictional characters, to recognize historical and cultural contexts, to anticipate turns of the plot, to criticize and evaluate the author's style, and so on. In this broader sense, any capacity to manipulate symbolic information is a skill, such as the skill of the mathematician to shape quantitative relationships in his head, or the skill of the musician in combining musical notes. And there's a footnote on reading. Reading is a favorite flow activity. This finding is reported in Massimini, Mr. C. and Del Fave, 1988. A recent book that describes in detail how reading provides enjoyment is by Nell, 1988. Another universally enjoyable activity is being with other people. Socializing might at first sight appear to be an exception to the statement that one needs to use skills to enjoy an activity, for it does not seem that gossiping or joking around with another person requires particular activities. But of course it does. As so many shy people know, if a person feels self-conscious, he or she will dread establishing informal contacts and avoid company whenever possible. And there's a footnote on socializing. Socializing as a flow activity. All the studies conducted with the experience sampling method confirm the fact that simply being with other people generally improves a person's mood significantly, regardless of what else is happening. I think only if the socializing is positive. If it's negative, then I don't think that would do it. This seems to be as true of teenagers, Mr. C. and Larson, 1984, as of adults, Larson, Mr. C. and Grave, 1980, and of older people, Larson, Manel, and Zuzanik, 1986. But to really enjoy the company of other people requires interpersonal skills. Which is probably a lost art, I would think, given all the iPhones and internet and all that stuff. We've lost the skill of how to interact with people and socializing, right? Any activity contains a bundle of opportunities for action or challenges that require appropriate skills to realize. For those who don't have the right skills, the activity is not challenging. It is simply meaningless. Setting up a chessboard gets the juices of a chess player flowing, but leaves cold anyone who does not know the rules of the game. To most people, the sheer wall of El Capitan in Yosemite Valley is just a huge chunk of featureless rock. But to the climber, it is an arena offering an endlessly complex symphony of mental and physical challenges. One simple way to find challenges is to enter a competitive situation. Hence the great appeal of all games and sports that pit a person or team against another. In many ways, competition is a quick way of developing complexity. He who wrestles with us, wrote Edmund Burke, strengthens our nerves and sharpens our skills. Our antagonist is our helper. The challenges of competition can be stimulating and enjoyable, but when beating the opponent takes precedence in the mind over performing as well as possible, enjoyment tends to disappear. Competition is enjoyable only when it is a means to perfect one's skills. When it becomes an end in itself, it ceases to be fun. But challenges are by no means confined to competitive or physical activities. They are necessary to provide enjoyment even in situations where one would not expect them to be relevant. For example, here is a quote from one of our studies of a statement made by an art expert describing the enjoyment he takes in looking at a painting. something most people would regard as an immediate, intuitive process. A lot of pieces that you deal with are very straightforward, and you don't find anything exciting about them, you know. But there are other pieces that have some sort of challenge. Those are the pieces that stay in your mind, that are the most interesting. In other words, even the passive enjoyment one gets from looking at a painting or sculpture depends on the challenges that the work of art contains. A lot of pieces. The quote is from a study of how fine art museum curators describe the aesthetic experience. Mr. C. and Robinson, in press, page 51. Hmm. Activities that provide enjoyment are often those that have been designed for this very purpose. Games, sports, and artistic and literary forms were developed over the centuries for the express purpose of enriching life with enjoyable experiences. But it would be a mistake to assume that only art and leisure can provide optimal experiences. In a healthy culture, productive work and the necessary routines of everyday life are also satisfying. In fact, one purpose of this book is to explore ways in which even routine details can be transformed into personally meaningful games that provide optimal experiences. Mowing the lawn or waiting in a dentist's office can become enjoyable, provided one restructures the activity by providing goals, rules, and the other elements of enjoyment to be reviewed below. Heinz Meyer-Leibniz, a famous German experimental physicist and a descendant of the 18th century philosopher and mathematician, provides an intriguing example of how one can take control of a boring situation and turn it into a mildly enjoyable one. Professor Meyer-Leibniz suffers from an occupational handicap common to academicians, having to sit through endless, often boring conferences. To alleviate this burden, he invented a private activity that provides just enough challenges for him not to be completely bored during a dull lecture, but is so automated that it leaves enough attention free so that if something interesting is being said, it will register in his awareness. Let's see what the footnote says about Professor Leibniz. Professor Meyer-Leibniz described his ingenious way of keeping track of time by tapping his fingers in a personal communication, 1986. What he does is this. Whenever a speaker begins to get tedious, he starts to tap his right thumb once, then his third finger of the right hand, then the index, then the fourth finger, then the third finger again, then the little finger of the right hand. Then he moves to the left hand and taps the little finger, the middle finger, the fourth finger, the index, and the middle finger again, and ends with the thumb of the left hand. Then the right hand reverses the sequence of fingering, followed by the reverse of the left hand's sequence. It turns out that by introducing full and half stops at regular intervals, there are 888 combinations one can move through without repeating the same pattern. Excuse me. 888, my favorite number. By interspersing pauses among the taps at regular intervals, the pattern requires an almost musical harmony. And in fact, it is easily represented on a musical staff. After inventing this innocent game, Professor Meyer-Leibniz found an interesting use for it as a way of measuring the length of trains of thought. The pattern of 888 taps repeated 3 times provides a set of 2,664 taps that, with practice, takes almost exactly 12 minutes to perform. As soon as he starts tapping by shifting attention to his fingers, Professor Meyer-Leibniz can tell exactly at what point he is in the sequence. So, suppose that a thought concerning one of his physics experiments appears in his consciousness while he is tapping during a boring lecture. He immediately shifts attention to his fingers and registers the fact that he is at the 300th tap of the second series. Then, in the same split second, he returns to the train of thought about the experiment. At a certain point, the thought is completed and he has figured out the problem. How long did it take him to solve the problem? By shifting attention back to his fingers, he notices that he is about to finish the second series. The thought process has taken approximately 2.25 minutes to play itself out. Few people bother inventing quite such ingenious and complex diversions to improve the quality of their experiences, but all of us have more modest versions of the same. Everybody develops routines to fill in the boring gaps of the day or to bring experience back to an even keel when anxiety threatens. Some people are compulsive doodlers. I know someone who used to draw in boring lectures. He'd still listen. I mean, you could tell he's listening to uh the lecturer, um, but it just seems like he puts his attention like half and half, I guess you could say, half on his drawing and then half on the lecturer in the peripheral sense. Oh, it's kind of interesting. Some people are compulsive doodlers, others chew on things or smoke, smooth their hair, hum a tune, or engage in more esoteric private rituals that have the same purpose to impose order in consciousness through the performance of patterned action. These are the microflow activities that help us negotiate the doldrums of the day. But how enjoyable an activity is depends ultimately on its complexity. The small automatic games woven into the fabric of everyday life help reduce boredom and add little to the positive quality of experience. For that one needs to face more demanding. Uh, for that one, for that one needs to face more demanding challenges and use higher level skills. Okay, here's a footnote on the microflow. Okay, the importance of microflow activities was examined in Beyond Boredom and Anxiety, Mr. C, 1975, page 140 to 178. Those studies showed that if people were asked to do without their usual routines, such as tapping their fingers, doodling, whistling, or joking with friends, within a matter of hours, they would become irritable. Frequently, they would report loss of control and disruption of behavior after only a day of microflow deprivation. Few people were able or willing to do without these small routines for more than 24 hours. In all the activities people in our study reported engaging in, enjoyment comes at a very specific point. Whenever the opportunities for action perceived by the individual are equal to his or her capabilities. Playing tennis, for instance, is not enjoyable if the two opponents are mismatched. The less skilled player will feel anxious, and the better player will feel bored. The same is true of every other activity. A piece of music that is too simple relative to one's listening skills will be boring, while music that is too complex will be frustrating. Enjoyment appears at the boundary between boredom and anxiety, when the challenges are just balanced with the person's capacity to act. The golden ratio between challenges and skills does not only hold true for human activities. Whenever I took our hunting dog, Hussar, for a walk in the open fields, he liked to play a very simple game, the prototype of the most culturally widespread game of human children, escape and pursuit. He would run circles around me at top speed, with his tongue hanging out and his eyes warily watching every move I made, daring me to catch him. Occasionally, I would take the lunge, and if I was lucky, I got to touch him. Now, the interesting part is that whenever I was tired, I moved half-heartedly. Lussard would run much tighter circles, making it relatively easy for me to catch him. On the other hand, if I was in good shape and willing to extend myself, he would enlarge the diameter of his circle. In this way, the difficulty of the game was kept constant. With an uncanny sense for the fine balancing of challenges and skills, he would make sure that the game would yield the maximum of enjoyment for us both. So there is a footnote on that, and we will stop here for now. Let's read the footnote real quick. The balanced ratio between challenges and skills was recognized from the very beginning as one of the central conditions of the flow experience, e.g., Mr. C, 1975, page 49 to 54. The original model assumed that enjoyment would occur along the entire diagonal, that is, when challenges and skills were both very low, as well as when they were both very high. Empirical research findings later led to a modification of the model. People did not enjoy situations in which their skills and the outside challengers were both lower than their accustomed levels. The new model predicts flow only when challenges and skills are relatively in balance and above the individual's mean level. And this prediction is confirmed by the studies conducted with the experience sampling method. Carly, 1986, Mr. C, and Nakamura, 1989. Massamini, Mr. C, and Carly, 1987. In addition, these studies have shown that the condition of anxiety, high challenge, low skills, is relatively rare in everyday life, and it is experienced as much more negative than the condition of boredom, low challenge, high skills. And we will stop here for now. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for joining us today. And we will continue our reading next time with part 2. In the meantime, I hope you guys all have a great day. Bye-bye now.